All right, so we are continuing on with the Greg Kokel stuff tonight. There's a little short snippet left over from the end of the last week's session that we didn't get to, just 3 or 4 minutes or so, and we'll talk about that for a second, and then we'll move on into the next teaching. Before we do that, though, Casey, will you share with us the story from last week that you were able to? Do we have the mics up where they can hear Casey?
The environment to change. I've been asking for prayer, and so because it feels very stifled. Mm-hmm. And this person just randomly started talking about how someone came over, and it was a preacher, and he lived down the road, and he was visiting, and he said, "Do you read your Bible?" And I was kind of like, well, that was different. I needed more context. So I said, well, what made him say that? Were you in a conversation? And she said, well, I just went to his church recently and visited, and so he was following up. And I was like, okay. And she said, well, in the conversation, he said, are you saved? And then she turned straight and looked at me, and she said, what does it mean to be saved? Oh, I was just like, so and so okay, the other great thing about this is these kind of conversations in this environment, there's sometimes a voice that will shut the things down. Mm-hmm. And I had two other people listening, and I said, oh, and this person has a Catholic background. So I knew that, so I knew they were familiar with the name Jesus and that there was a person Jesus. So I said, he's just meaning that, do you believe that Jesus died on the cross for your sins, was raised again, and that you're trusting him to take you to heaven? So I don't think she really believed me. She said she's going to follow up with him, but I was with the guy. But that's good. And it really sunk in, these teachings that we're talking about, they have to know what you're talking about. Mm-hmm. That was so that pierced me, because she's talking to a preacher. And that's great, and she had enjoyed the church and all that, but you can't throw out these terms it doesn't have to. Yeah, that.
If you're going to throw out the term, then you've got to say, do you know what I mean when I say it?
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, so.
Yeah. Are you saved? Okay, see ya.
Because listen, that always has to be the follow-up question. If I look at somebody and say, okay, do you consider yourself a follower of Jesus, having accepted the gospel, and you're saved? They say yes. I'll say, fantastic. What does that mean to you?
Yep.
Because most of the time, I hate to say this, most of the time they don't know what it means. Which means that discussion needs to happen. And those are opportunities, man.
I was just so excited to be on the second part of that.
Yeah.
I feel like so many times we're the first person, and you don't know after they've thought about it. So
that's very cool.
It's good to hear, because that's something we have to understand. If you're saying stuff and you're talking to people, they might be looking later on to somebody else for some more information.
Mm-hmm.
So you gotta give them what. Yeah.
And so that gets back to the gardening concept that Greg Kokel's been talking about. Do you know how that's going to play out? No, not yet. But you did a little gardening, and you helped it along. You were some water or some seed or some fertilizer, however you want to look at yourself. I'll let you choose that. What I love about that is that we prayed for that very specific thing to happen, and God opened the door there. That's very cool. All right. Okay, let's cue up the first part of the video.
So you don't have to hit home runs. You don't even have to get on base, in my view. All you have to do is get up to bat, get in the batter's box, and the first 2 Columbo questions will accomplish that. Now, I want to show you one more thing that is an advantage of these Columbo questions. I call it getting out of the hot seat. Sometimes you're afraid of going further in a conversation because you think, oh, maybe this other person knows more about this stuff than I do, and they're going to hit me with a bunch of stuff I don't know how to answer, okay? And so you end up not saying anything at all. You don't want to get in over your heads, okay? You don't want to get pushed around by some aggressive critic that's blasting you with your arguments or opinions or information that you don't know how to handle. Okay, and I can sympathize with that. You don't want to get in that circumstance, because once you get in that circumstance, who's in the driver's seat now? Not you. They are. You want to be in the driver's seat, okay? And this next little adaptation of our first two Columbo questions are going to buy you some time if you find yourself in that situation, okay? And part of what I want you to see here is I don't want you to feel under pressure to immediately answer every question or every point that's made, especially when the other person is coming on really strong, okay? If you find yourself in a circumstance where you start out in persuasion mode and you're trying to get them to see your point of view, and then they come back with information or arguments or points of view that you have no understanding of, you've not been exposed to at all, you find yourself at total loss for words, really overwhelmed by the information. They may not be overwhelming you with their personality. That's a different set of circumstances, but you just can't deal with this information. When you're in a situation like that, let me ask you first of all, who now is in the driver's seat? Not you, right? The other person's in the driver's seat, okay? I'm going to give you a move that will help you get out of this hot seat that you find yourself in. Okay, and I want you to practice a little bit of what I want to call conversational Aikido. Aikido is that self-defense practice that you don't oppose the force of someone else. You don't push back. You just use their force in your favor, okay? So what we're going to do, in a sense, is let them keep coming at you, but we'll want to do it in a way that you will actually be in control of the conversation. So if you find yourself in the hot seat, being overwhelmed with information you don't know, you want to shift immediately from persuasion mode to fact-finding mode. You want to immediately become a student. And you can say something like this. You say, wow, it sounds like you know a lot more about this than I do. I wonder if you could help me out here and just do me a favor. Slow down a little bit. Because I really want to understand your particular point of view. And tell me more clearly precisely what it is that you believe, and then tell me your reasons for it. Okay, and I'll get a piece of paper out and maybe I'll take some notes because I want to get this right. Now, what you've done then is you've completely reversed the circumstances. Do you have any obligation to answer their challenge when they give it to you? No, you've already said, I'm the dummy. You're the smart person. I don't know what's going on. Give me an education. All right. And then they talk to you. They let you know what they believe and why they believe it. You might be taking some notes or at least making a mental note of it. And then you say to them, let me think about it. Let me think about it. Now, them's the magic words, and I'll tell you why. Because if you say, then let me think about it, do you have any obligation to answer the challenge? No, none at all. You're going to think about it, okay? So then what do? Well, you do what you said you're going to do. You think about it on your own, at your leisure, when the pressure is off. That's the best time to resolve these things. And you can go to websites, you can go to books, you can go to any other resources that you've used in the past to get information regarding that thing. Now that you got the point of view and the reasons for it, and you can work it out on your own. And then you'll be ready for the next time. The next time that person or some other person with the same thing comes up, you'll be ready to respond to that particular issue. And if you can respond to it by using questions to make your point, all the better. The key here is to get out of the hot seat, but still stay engaged and get yourself back in the driver's seat. Essentially, what you're saying to the person is, you want to beat me up? Okay. Just do it slowly and thoroughly, please. Now, is there anybody that you know yourself, even the most retiring, shy, bashful, skittish, timid, reserved, who cannot do this, who cannot say, you want to beat me up? Okay, just do it slowly and thoroughly, please. No, anybody can do this. This is easy. This is easy. Now, you haven't won that person to Christ, but that's okay. That's not our goal. Our goal isn't to get them to sign on the dotted line. Our goal is to do a little gardening. And sometimes we find ourselves at a disadvantage. And then we have to maneuver tactically to stay in the driver's seat and make the best of the circumstance that we are disadvantaged in. And this is the way to do it. Those two questions, just the way I've described it. Remember, you don't have to swing for the fences. You don't even have to get on base. You just need to get in the batter's box, and these 2 questions will get you there. Get in the batter's box, use these questions, then watch and see what the Holy Spirit does.
So again, here's the disclaimer. Don't let's not bash him for not getting to Jesus in each one of these teachings. We know we want to get to Jesus. Okay, we've accepted that. Okay, we're just taking all the tools that he's given us so that we can learn how to control conversations and steer them in the direction they need to go. Okay, take all of the pieces and fit them into your conversations, however they will fit. The techniques are good. They make sense and they work. Let's try to use it to get to Jesus. In gardening, I want to at least get some truth in there. Okay, I'm not going to be comfortable leaving it at that and walking away. I'm going to say something about Jesus before we leave that conversation. Okay, so we're accepting that premise. Okay, good point there. If overwhelmed by the other person's points, some people have no points to back up their position. Okay, that's something you can point out. You can challenge them on. Great. Some people actually have really thought it through. They've done research. They have a list of things that they consider to be true that back up their position. If you feel like you were overmatched in the conversation, one, you can default to Jesus always. You can always say, look, I don't know about that, but here's what I know, and you can share your testimony. Okay, that is a good tactic as well if you're trying to get to Jesus. The other thing you can say is, I really don't understand, like you know a lot more about that specific part of this conversation than I do. Slow down and go through it with me again and explain it really, really well. I want to learn. Okay? That, again, it disarms them. They have no reason to have a defensive block up against you. The conversation is continuing, and you're still listening the entire time they're talking. You're looking for something you can challenge. You're looking for a point that they make that actually makes no sense, and that's what the next part of the technique gets into, is how to take advantage of those things. The more you can get somebody to talk about who they are, what they believe, what they think, and why they think it, the better prepared you are to talk to them about their position and find something that you can critique enough that it at least puts the pebble in the shoe. Okay? So if you're overwhelmed, do not be afraid to say, hey, I don't get it. Explain it again, please. Slowly, thoroughly. And if you still don't find you're in to challenge their concept, their precepts, then very politely you say, hey, I heard you. I'm still not sure I get it. Let me think about it. Let's continue this later. Okay? Then do that. Go get smart on that point and come back and talk to them again if it's something that you have the opportunity to do. It gets you out of the hot seat, like he said. It helps you stay engaged and get back in the driver's seat of the conversation. At best, this will enable you to challenge their assertions. At worst, it will be a learning experience that will help you with the next conversation. A couple of quick things out of the book here for this section. In the book, they have these sections called ambassador skills for each lesson. Here's the one for this: narrating the debate. Many people you talk to will struggle when you turn the tables and ask them to provide evidence for their views. They'll try to change the subject or simply reassert their views, sometimes because they haven't thought much about the issue you're discussing. Dodging your question may be their only recourse. It's critical you narrate the debate at this point. Take a moment to stop and describe to them what's going on in the conversation. This will help your friend and others listening to see how they've gotten off course. You can say, hold on, first you made a fairly controversial statement which I asked you to clarify and defend. So far you haven't done that. That's fair. Okay? You ask somebody to back up their position and they divert and try to say something else. I always say, hey, I'm glad to talk about that too, but first, I asked you about this and you really didn't back that up, can you? And there's a way to say that doesn't make them disengage, okay? Don't let your friend get off the hook by dodging the issues. The tactical approach keeps the pressure on while keeping the conversation cordial. Encourage them to clarify themselves. This often is the first step toward a change of mind. And then the last thing on this section,
Turning the tables. If you're placed in a situation where you suspect your convictions will be labeled intolerant, bigoted, narrow-minded, or judgmental, turn the tables. When someone asks for your personal views about a moral issue, preface your remarks with a question. Say, you know, this is actually a very personal question you're asking, and I'd be glad to answer, but before I do, I want to know if you consider yourself to be a tolerant person. Is it safe to give my opinion, or are you going to judge me for my point of view? Do you respect diverse points of view, or do you condemn others for convictions that differ from yours? If they tell you they're tolerant, which they are going to have a need to say, they do not want to describe themselves as intolerant, then when you give your point of view, it's going to be difficult for them to find fault without looking guilty too. This approach is especially helpful when someone asks you what you think about homosexuality or abortion, issues like that. This response capitalizes on the fact that there is no neutral ground in these kinds of discussions. Everybody has a point of view he thinks is right, and everybody judges at some point or another. The Christian gets pigeonholed as the judgmental one, but everyone else is judging too. It's an inescapable consequence of believing explicitly or implicitly in any kind of truth. Feel free in those conversations to point out that you have a view that you hold to, but so do they. At least make sure they understand you're on a level playing field there. Don't allow them to label you as judgmental or intolerant without calling them on it if that's how they are as well. Okay? All right, any comments on that?
All right, let's roll.
Hi, Greg Hochul here with Stand to Reason, and this is our third session together, learning the tactical approach. I hope that you had a good time in the last couple of weeks, maybe, taking some of the stuff that we've learned and talked about and putting it into play and getting comfortable with it. Let's take a moment and talk about what we discussed last session. Last session, I introduced you to the second use of the Columbo tactic. That would be the second step in our game plan, and I call that reversing the burden of proof. Remember the rule that we talked about, the one who makes the claim bears the burden, which means we're not going to let the other side have any free rides. We're not going to let them get away with just making assertions, okay? We want the rationale. The next thing that I taught you was to avoid a kind of a trap, I call it the professor's ploy, in which the burden of proof is reversed upon you when you didn't make the claim. And I told you, don't ever allow someone else to make you disprove his or her view. It's their job to defend their own view with their own reasons and evidence first before you have to step up. Okay? And I told you also what to do when you didn't know what to do. This whole approach, our game plan, is a relaxed game plan. It's a don't push it game plan. It's a gardening game plan. So if you don't know where to go next, don't sweat it. If you don't see an opening, no big deal. Do what you can. Let the rest go. There's no need to force the conversation. The last thing that we talked about when we were together last time is I showed you how to use the Columbo tactic defensively to keep you out of the hot seat. So sometimes you're going to find yourself outmatched, somebody else that's drilling you with a lot of extra information you don't know how to handle. Go immediately into student mode. Even take notes if you have to. Invite the other person to tell you what they believe and why they believe it. Now you're the learner. You're not trying to persuade. Tell them you'll think about it, and then think about it. Work on it on your own when the pressure is off, and it's just a lot easier to do that. So that's what we talked about last time. Here's what I want to talk about in the third session. I want to complete the game plan, basically. I want to teach you the third step in the Columbo tactic, the third use of Columbo. And that third use is using questions to make a point, or using questions to lead someone somewhere. I'm going to show you, in addition to that, some very specific ways that you can improve your use of Columbo. And finally, I want to show you how to defend against the Columbo tactic when somebody else uses it with you. So let's talk for a moment about the third step. We talked about the first step of the game plan. All you're going to worry about is gathering information. You're going to use the question, what do you mean by that? The next step, when people make a claim or an assertion, then we reverse the burden of proof on the person who's making the claim. We use the question, now how did you come to that conclusion, or some version of that, okay? Here's the third use of Columbo. In the first two uses, by the way, we didn't need to know anything but the questions, and that's why it's such a good game plan. In the third use of Columbo, you got to know something. If you're going to use questions to make a point, you got to know the point that you're going to make. Think of it like you have a target, and target is the point you want to make. The questions that you use are going to be arrows shooting at the target, so you have to have the target in view. Now, there are two different ways that you can use this, two different kinds of targets, I guess is the best way to put it. You can use questions to advance your own point of view. So let's say you want to make a point. How do you do that? Use the Columbo tactic. We'll talk about how to do that. Secondly, you can use your questions to exploit a weakness or a flaw. That means you can help a person see where he or she went wrong in their thinking. Let me go back just for a moment to something I said a moment ago. In the first two uses of Columbo, you don't need to know anything but the questions. That's the strength of it for beginners. If you want to use Columbo in a more aggressive way, the third use of Columbo, you're going to make a point. You need to know the point you want to make. You need to know, say, the solution to the problem, if there's a problem in view. And let's just say the question is, why is Jesus the only way? So you want to make the case, or at least you want to explain why Jesus is the only way of salvation. So what do you need to know in that one? You need to know why Jesus is the only way of salvation. If you don't know that, then you can't go further. You got to know the answer to the question, but you also have to know how you're going to get there. So there are pieces to this explanation that you need to have in place. Now, let me tell you a secret about the pieces. If you take the pieces and you place them out one after another, and they lead to your conclusion, it is going to be very easy for the other person, especially if they're a little bit of a kind of aggravated as a skeptic. In other words, they're not playing ball with you very much. They're having conversation, but they're not coming along easily. Then they're going to find something wrong with everything that you say. You're going to have to put pieces on the table to get to your conclusion. In this case, how Jesus or why Jesus is the only way of salvation. But they're not going to let you finish because they're going to start taking exception with the pieces that you put out there to make your case. There's a way around this. And you can call it a trick if you want to. It's tricky, but it's not abusive. And the thing is you want to get as much as possible the other person to put the pieces on the table for you. You want to ask the kind of questions that will get them to affirm these pieces that you are going to use eventually to lead to your point. Now, if they're going to affirm those pieces, you can see, can't you, how hard it's going to be for them to take them off the table. They're their points. They've already said yes to them. They can't go back later and deny them. That's a lot more difficult for them to do. So let me show you what I mean, especially with this issue about Jesus being the only way. One of the first books I wrote was featured at Barnes & Noble, and they had me come in and give a presentation for the book. And it's the thing where the author talks about the books, answers questions, and then signs some books. Well, somebody had been standing off to the side in the maybe the religion section or whatever, and had heard some of the things I had to say. So that person came up to me and asked me a question. They said, "Why do I need to believe in Jesus? I'm Jewish," he said. I try to live as best that I can. I believe in God. So why do I need your Jesus? So that's the question, right? It can be phrased lots of different ways, but this is, why is Jesus the only way of salvation? So now I need to explain this to him, but I know I need to put some pieces on the table. So I said to him, "Do you mind if I ask you a couple questions?" He said, "No, go ahead." I said, "Here's the question." I said, first question. I said, "Do you think the people who do bad things ought to be punished?" He thought for a moment, and then he said, "Well, since I'm a prosecuting attorney, yes." Now, I got lucky in the attorney part. I didn't know that about him, but most people do have this intuition, this deep understanding of justice, that people who do bad things ought to pay for them. Okay, so good. People who do bad things ought to pay. I agree with you, I said to him. So we got a piece on the table that he put there, but I agree with it. Okay, great. Second question. Have you ever done any bad things? That's what I asked him. He paused for a moment and then said, "Well, yeah, I guess I have." Now, if he would have said he's never done any bad things, I would have said, "Can I talk to your wife?" Everybody's done bad things. We all know this. And he was just being honest with me. Okay, fine. There's another piece on the table. I said, "I agree with you." I said, Now, do you know where we've gotten here? Look where we've come in just 2 questions. This is what I said to him. I said, we both believe that people who do bad things ought to be punished, and we both believe that we've done those things. Do you know what I call that? I asked him. He said, what? I said, I call that bad news. Now you think about it for a moment. Do I have to tell this man that he's a sinner, I guess? He said, no, he's already told me. Do I have to tell him that he's under judgment? No, he's already told me. Now, he doesn't know where I'm going with this. He wasn't thinking about that when he walked into the Barnes & Noble. But because I asked him a very specific question that had a very straightforward, reasonable, understandable response, he gave it to me. Now I got this stuff on the table. And I told him, well, it's like you and I are both standing in the dock. And the judge, God, is there ready to deliver sentence on us, and we know we deserve it. And then God pauses and he says, hey, fellas, do either of you care about a pardon right now? Are you interested in clemency right now? Now, I want you to see what just happened there, friend. What I did was I gathered some things that were things that he already knew. They're built into him. And now I'm using them to help him feel the force of the problem so he can feel the force of the solution. He and I are both in trouble. God is offering a way out. So what's the way out? The way out is that God became a man himself and initiated a rescue operation, living the life that we should have lived, and then getting in the docket for us so that he could take the punishment that we deserve. That's what I explained to him. I think I might have said something about Jesus taking the rap for our crimes against God. Notice the language I'm using. Why am I talking like that? Well, because he's an attorney. This is his language. It's also biblical language. The reason that Jesus is the only way is because he's the only one who solved the problem. Either he stands in the docket, gets our punishment, or we take our own punishment. That's it. If we say yes to Jesus, we're forgiven. If we say no to Jesus, then we get what we deserve to get. So there's the full expanded explanation. But do you see how I got there? I knew the explanation. I understood the problem. And I was able to explain it to somebody in non-religious terms. But what did I do to get there? I used some questions to get some important pieces on the table before I could move forward with my argument. So now you're beginning to see, if you want to go an advanced and more effective way of using Columbo, you've got to know some things. You've got to know answers to challenges. You've got to know some arguments. And you're going to get that by reading or listening or talking with other Christians. However you get it, doesn't matter. Once you get it, you want to know how you can express it in a way that others can understand it. And then as much as possible, you want to get the pieces that you need on the table by asking questions. The questions are really critical. Even though you're making a point, it keeps them engaged. Okay? Now let's take another example. Somebody at a session, Q&A session, once asked, or actually said, give me, the way he put it was, prove to me that God exists. Prove to me God exists. Now, that kind of put me on the spot. I'm there answering questions. I'm the apologist, and somebody says, prove to me God exists. It's kind of like saying you're a comedian, and somebody says, okay, be funny, like right now. Well, here's what I said to him. I said, before I go any further, I've got to repair some problem that are in your challenge. What's that? Well, you said prove. I don't know what you would count as evidence. And unless I have an idea of what would count as evidence to you, there's no sense in me giving anything that I think is a proof. And this is something you ought to keep in mind too, friends. This is, if you have somebody say, prove this or that, and you don't solve this problem, you can put evidence before them all day long, and they can just simply say, that's not what? Proof, okay? So you got to clear that up. The second thing I pointed out to him is you said, prove to me. So you want me to give you a line of thinking that is so powerful that it will even convert you. Well, I don't know what your barriers are, what your objections are, what are the kinds of things that would resonate with you. So I asked him, can you put the challenge in a little different way that doesn't put me at such a disadvantage? And incidentally, this kind of bargaining with people is entirely okay. It's a fair request. And so he said, well, maybe, can you give me some good reason that God exists. Okay, well, that was much better. And I said, yeah, I think I can do that. Okay, but I have to ask you a few questions first. Now, what do I need to know before I go forward in this conversation with this guy? I need to know a good reason that God exists, right? When I know the good reason God exists, I know the steps that get me there. Then I'm going to try to have him help me by affirming the steps, put the pieces in place before I kind of get to the punchline, so to speak. All right? So here's the question I asked him. First one, I said, and in these questions I told him are kind of simple, but just bear with me. Do you think that things exist? He said, yeah, things exist. Okay, things exist. We both agree with that. Okay, here was my second question. Do you think that the things that exist have always existed? Or did they come into existence at some point of time? Now, he said, no, they haven't always existed. And there's hardly anybody around anymore that's thought about this very much, that thinks the universe is eternal, all right? That's a dead and gone idea. And partly because of the force of Big Bang cosmology. So again, I think this is something that some Christians are uncomfortable with, but just keep in mind, that's what they believe. So let's just work with that. We can use it to our advantage. No, he said, I think that things came into existence at some point in time. Big Bang, fine. I agree with you, I said. Okay, fine. So we're both in agreement about these two things on the table. Now the third question, I said to him, and this is the one that really matters. All those things that came into existence, what caused them to come into existence? And there he paused for a moment. And some people will say, well, look, what do I know? I'm not a scientist. I'm not a physicist. Who am I to say? And I say, wait a minute, it's not really that hard. It's simple. There are only two possibilities. Either something caused the universe to come into existence, or no thing caused the universe to come into existence. It's just that simple. There are no other alternatives. Either something or no thing. What say you? Okay, now, for me as a questioner, I'm in a very, very good spot, because I have moved him with information he's given me to a point where now he has to make a decision, and he's stuck because he doesn't want to say that something caused the universe, because the minute he says something caused the universe, it would have to be something that is outside of the universe. You see that, right? Outside of the space-time continuum. Not something natural, but something at least supranatural, maybe supernatural. And that immediately is an assault on his maybe atheistic, materialistic point of view. He didn't want to go there. And also it would have to be not just something outside of the material universe, but something that's really powerful and probably really smart and probably personal, and there are other reasons for that. And before long, you can see we're getting pretty close to the G word here. This is starting to sound like God caused the universe. Now, he didn't want to go there. All right, fine. Then what is your only other alternative? And notice how I'm prosecuting this using questions. What is your only other alternative? Since you don't want to say something caused the universe, then you have to say that no thing caused the universe. But this is hard to say, because that's worse than magic. In magic, you have a magician who pulls a rabbit out of a hat. Here you have no hat, and you have no magician. You just have the rabbit, the universe coming into existence. This is wildly counterintuitive. When a wife comes home from work and sees a new Mercedes SL sitting in the garage, she asks her husband, honey, where'd that Mercedes come from? He said, I don't know, honey, it just popped into existence out of nothing for no reason. If you were his wife, would you buy that? No, of course not. This is not reasonable. Now, maybe somebody might say, it's possible. Okay, I'm not going to argue with that. We're not trying to convince them that our view is absolutely necessary that God exists and created the universe. We just want to show them that it's the odds-on favorite. And that's what I'm doing here. Notice how I make this case, though. I'm using Columbo number 3 to make a point. The point is, in this case, that God exists. But I have to know the reason or some reasons why God exists, and I have to know how to work through that argument, and I use the questions to get as many pieces on the table as I can, and then I use them to go to my ending and then see what he says, okay? So that's one way of using the Columbo tactic, Columbo number 3, and that is by making a point, all right?
It's called a cliffhanger in the business. You got to wait till next week to find out what the next Friday.
In the business, I didn't.
That's right.
You don't think about it that much of like, okay, you don't believe in God. You believe the universe came from nothing.
Yeah.
Has ever, at any point in all of human recorded history, anybody ever seen anything, not a universe, just anything, a single bit of matter come from nothing? Ever?
Yeah.
No, of course not. So you believe the whole universe, though, somehow just, like, it's so simple, but it's so, like, that basic.
The beauty of it is to walk them up to the point where they have to say that if they want to hang on to their position. You know?
Yeah.
And it catches them off guard.
Like, yeah. No. Okay.
But again, no, it's not aggressive. It's not. It doesn't even sound judgmental. It's just walking them through a mental process to where they start to realize their position doesn't make sense. And again, even if at that point they're not willing to consider God, at least they have to stop considering nothing. You know, I like that a lot. And that is not too complex for any of you to do. And that's just one example. You know, that's one of the viewpoints, worldviews that you're going to run into, that you're going to have to try to counteract. There's not a one of you that can handle exactly what he just did. You can't, and you should. Because the people that believe that are going to hell if they don't have their assertions challenged. And so you need to pray for boldness and favor and wisdom and discernment to know how to have those conversations. Yeah.
Just see, I think that's aggressive in a good way. I think being prepared is aggressive. I know what we tend to believe when we say, hey, you've been aggressive. But see, that's being aggressive. You know, not being just stopped in your tracks like dumbfounded. I'm not that. I'm just saying. But this guy's prepared. You know, and there's nothing wrong with that. See, he's always got the upper hand. But and that's been aggressive. You know, and there's nothing wrong with being prepared. So anyway.
Yeah, no, it should be. Need to be. Don't be afraid to be called aggressive. Because you're going to be. They need, at some point in this conversation, if the person gets uncomfortable enough with it and they need to try to get out of it without looking stupid, they're going to need to label you as something that makes the conversation no longer necessary. So they're going to want to call you aggressive in a negative way, or they're going to label you with something that makes them feel okay with going, I don't need to talk to that clown. But you can't be afraid of that. You're still putting rocks in the chute. To go back to the end of the other session, where the whole let me think about it thing, the other thing I like about if you have the ability to have a long-form conversation with somebody, giving them as much time as they are willing to take to explain their side really kind of obligates them to listen to yours as well. And I like that too. If you get to the point where you are overwhelmed and they're really up on what they're talking about, and you don't have the mental capacity to challenge it at the moment, you don't have the knowledge base, let me think about it, is great, and you can follow that up with, and I will think about it, and we can talk about it some more. But since we're already talking, now can I explain to you my position? Can I explain to you my worldview on these things? I'm just going to lay that there. The pager thing for the doorbell. So nobody's getting in now. Yeah.
So I think an important aspect of of both the second point and here in the third session is one thing that you can definitely do if somebody is aggressively restating some position or they're teaching you something. One common thing you can do is restate what they said back to them.
Yeah.
So let me understand what you're saying. Let me see if I get this. You said blah, blah, blah. Especially effective if there's more than two of you. If there's another group of person there, because you can get them to understand that. And what that allows you to do, if you understand the argument they're making, is to start pointing towards the holes in the argument, and then that gives you your position to step in from that third point.
Yeah, that will be the next thing that he covers, is using. Here he talked about using questions to get to a point that you want to make, but then after that he will talk about using questions to challenge their assertions.
Well, getting them to say the thing, walking them to it, it reminds me of what Graham has always said, like when people say the things out loud, they realize how dumb that sounds.
That's right. Same thing happens to me all the time. I can have this amazing thought process in my mind that leads me to some conclusion, and as I'm sharing it with somebody else, and there's dead silence on the other end.
Hang on.
Like, it's not uncommon for me to, as I'm saying it out loud, go, wait a minute, this doesn't make any sense at all.
Which is where the restatement thing comes up.
Yeah.
Because sometimes people talk, they don't even think about what they're talking about.
Yeah.
So sometimes just saying it back to them in a slightly different wording.
And it helps break through like the sloganing and just the repeating
Yeah.
of just the cultural talking points. When you can bounce it back at them and rephrase it in a way that makes them engage with it, they're a lot more likely to stop and think about what they're saying instead of just repeating
That's right.
the same thing you hear over and over.
Yep.
And it actually proves to them you're listening.
That was going to be my next
You're
point.
engaging with them.
Yeah.
So, of course, there's different types. Like, you know, the random stranger you're going to run into on the street, that's how you handle that one way. But for somebody that you may run into, like in your workplace, day after day, as I get older, I don't like arguing more. Like I used to. Let's do it.
Yeah, right.
But you know, because you're not going to argue somebody out of how they think.
Right.
And the more you talk, sometimes the more amped it gets. And so I really like that. Let me think about it, because it tells them, if you think about it and you come back, it's telling them, okay, especially in this culture, they mattered enough that you thought about it and came back and started another conversation with it being on a lower. And all of that feels like a more level of open and acceptance.
Totally agree. It makes it a conversation as opposed to a preaching session.
Yeah. And those are the kind of people that you can always just lob sort of an open-ended question. You know, if they have a response, you can just, oh, that's interesting, yeah, I'll think about that, or maybe I'll look into that. And then come back with another, you know, it never has to get to that point of trying to push something on. You can just kind of keep those open-ended questions going, and hopefully they'll examine their own assumptions, you know, with each question if they're, you know, listening to you.
And the more honestly you try to work through their assertions, if they're at all reasonable, at some point they will feel the need to extend the same courtesy to you. It just makes sense. I really like this idea of using a thought process to walk people up, give them a piece of the thought process and have them agree to that. Then move on to the next piece, have them agree to that until you get to closer to your point that you're aiming at. Okay. Because it's hard for them to backtrack through these other things they've already agreed to. So that was a great example of it. These are things that you should be doing on your own. Think of the general arguments that people will offer against what we have faith in. He used the example of creation by Big Bang, evolution, whatever. You know the main things that the culture in general are going to use to deflect our faith and to not consider it. So you should have ahead of time a thought process, being prepared, like Mike said, to walk somebody through a thought process to get them to a point that you're trying to get them to not only understand, but hopefully agree to in regards to Jesus. And so another great example of that is people who will accept Jesus was a man that walked the earth 2,000 years ago. He great teacher, maybe even a prophet, whatever. He's just not God. Okay, that's one of the arguments you're going to get. Well, there's a thought process you can walk people through to get to that point of why do I believe he's God? Logically, why do I believe he's God? He has revealed himself to me, and I know him. So, but I can't convey that so much in a conversation, not in a way that helps them get to the same thing. If they're coming at it from logic, I've got to attack their logic. So you can go to this person. Think of the target audience: people who take the advice of experts to make their decisions. People who are investors do this. They're always looking for the next financial guru and what's their track record, and is their track record good enough for me to trust to follow their advice. The same thing works for people that bet on sports, right? They're always looking for people who give advice on betting. They're looking at their track record so they can decide whether to take their advice. People with a scientific mindset are looking for, empirical evidence of processes that would then become prophetic of how the process should work every time. Those kinds of people that are looking at it logically like that, you can use the prophetic argument on them to walk them up to, hey, I think Jesus is God because the prophecy said he was, because the Bible says he is. Okay, that's my point I want to get to. And I start with, you can start with a simple question. Hey, how many times would somebody have to be right before you would believe their next prediction? Right? What accuracy rate, percentage-wise, would somebody need before you would consider their advice to be plausible to listen to? Okay, get them to define that. Okay, there's a piece that's on the table. And you can walk them through this concept of, we have over 300 prophecies. And we do have empirical evidence that those things did happen and those things did come true. He was born in a specific place. He did go to Egypt. All of these things. There were signs and wonders. All of these prophecies, over 300 prophecies. You can pick out some of them and memorize those. And go, hey, here are some things, not about him being God, but just where he would be born and what his name would be and circumstances and all this kind of stuff. And you could say, now if somebody was able to prophesy all of those things to me, then would it not also make sense for me to believe the prophecy that he is God and that he is Savior and that he is Messiah and all of that? At least get them to agree to the concept of it. And if not, they need to know why they're not willing to agree to the concept. You know, a great question in all these conversations is, we're going to stop because we're already late. A great question for all of these conversations is, if I could show you truth that disproves the way you look at this and what you believe, would you believe the other side? Okay, some people need to ask themselves that question. And most people don't. They never challenge themselves to that extent. So.
It's the, do you want to be healed or?
It is. It is.
Are you willing to accept the concept?
Yep. Yep. Okay, so I talked more than I intended. If you have questions or comments, write those down and remember them. We can start with that next time if you want. But it's already 7:35. We've got to get into the prayer meeting. So if you're watching online and you have the link to join us by Zoom for the prayer meeting, please do that. It begins immediately. If not, we'll see you Sunday. But until then, love God, love everybody else. See you. I know you got to head out. You guys are leaving Friday.